question has been asked, can I really believe there is a God? We're not going to be talking about who asked that question, but that's not important as the answer. The answer is important because it's important to all of us. It's important to young people who are developing in their faith in the existence of God, who are bombarded every day with things that try to convince them that there is no God. Even those who are Christians, we continue to need to be seeing the basis of our faith. Sometimes we just simply ask and wonder ourselves about the reality of a God that we cannot see. So we're in continual need of the answer to this question. And when we look at the answer, what we're going to do is to simply try to accept the challenge. We together this morning in this sermon time will answer this question. We're going to give the best answer we can. In my opinion, one of the best answers there is. And so we do that in order that we may be helpful to each and every one of you, to the young, to the old, to those who are Christians, to those who are not yet Christians. Can I really believe there is a God? We're going to answer this question first with a short answer. The short answer is yes. Yes, we can. Without doubt, unequivocally, we can. And you can do so with, this is important, you can do so with honesty. There's nothing dishonest. There is no deception about believing in God. No one has to deceive you. You don't have to deceive yourself or trick yourself into thinking something. It's just honest. It is also done with rational thinking. By that I mean simply your regular, intelligent, rational thought process. Not something that's irrational, not something that's strange and kinky. You have to believe something weird and think that way in order to believe in God. That's not so. You actually come to believe in God through your own intelligent, rational thinking, just like you do everything else. And then finally, I would suggest that you can do so with consideration of prima facie evidence. I use that expression because that's important. Prima facie evidence is the best that you can have. If you had an attorney that was representing you in a court case, and he came to you and said, okay, I've got this. We have prima facie evidence. That's where we'll find this word used a lot. Meaning, we've got an open and shut case. There's no way this case can be denied. It's already locked up. Well, that's the kind of evidence that we have for the existence of God. Let's just say, in short, evidence that is sufficient to establish the fact. What we have on the screen now as we endeavor to answer this question, I will try to do so honestly. I will try to do so with rational thinking. I will try to show us the prima facie evidence. But we see before us the two propositions. One is God exists. There is a God. He is an actual living being. The other proposition is he does not exist. There is no God. A lot of people function as if there were a middle ground. And that's where a lot of people think they are. Is in the middle ground here. I don't have to think one way, I don't have to think the other, and really, in fact, I don't care. I'm sorry. That doesn't work. Because in this in this decision. In any decision that involves logic, in any decision that involves critical thinking or any rational thinking that we're trying to engage, there is a necessity of acknowledging the law of the excluded middle. If you're not familiar with that law, I would suggest you might inform yourself by reading about it. It's in Wikipedia, it's in encyclopedias and other sources, but there is such a law that applies and has an application to this kind of thinking, proving what we can't see. What is the law of the excluded middle? It says for every proposition, either this proposition or its negation is true. Now, our proposition is God exists. That's our proposition. And what this law says, either that or its negation, there is no God, is true. One or the other is true. You see, what that law does is exactly what it's named for. It excludes middle ground. There is no middle ground in this. There is no comfort zone in this. There is no place where you can get and feel like, okay, I don't have to worry about this anymore. There is no middle ground. And so as a result of that, what we have, the only two possible beliefs, only two. One is God exists or he does not. It's that black and white. I want to make a note about this. To accept one or the other requires faith. Now, I don't want to be misunderstood about that. It's not the same faith over here as it is over here. But when you must believe something that you can't see, and you must believe what you can't prove in a laboratory, it takes believing conviction that is called faith. We have a special kind of faith, but nevertheless, to the individual that does not believe that God exists or believe that God does not exist, takes faith. And so we ask, which is the better? Which has better evidence? And so that's an important question that everybody, everybody has to deal with and be honest about. So here is our proposition. We are affirming, beyond a shadow of a doubt, based upon the prima facie evidence, that God exists. So that raises a question. And that question is, what's the evidence? That's a good question. And that's one that everybody should ask. No matter how long you have lived, no matter how long you've been a Christian, we still want to know, what's the evidence? We can't see him. We can't feel him. We can't discern him with our physical senses. What is the evidence? Well, we'll make a statement about what we're going to be saying here in the next few minutes. That the basic evidence for the existence of God is neither difficult nor obscure. That means we can all understand it. Even the young people, even kids can understand it. Now, not at the same level that an adult would, but they can understand it. And it's not confusing, it's not obscure, it's not hidden where you have to go. It's clear. It's right out in front of us. And so let's identify some basic evidence that will help us answer this question. Can I really believe that there is a God? The evidence is what is called the law of cause and effect. That law bears evidence of God's existence. And that law is very basic. It's accepted in everything. And we need to see it and understand it in our faith in God's existence. It is very simple. It just simply says, for every effect there must be a cause. If it exists, someone made it exist. If it was built, someone had to build it. If it is a structure, someone had to construct it. If it's there, it had to have a cause. Nothing happens without a cause. Nothing. So you see how that relates? Matter is not eternal. The physical substances that we live in and around every day are not eternal. That means they have not always been here and they will not always be here. They came into existence and are temporary. Now, that means someone had to bring them into existence. Matter, that is material, cannot bring itself into existence. That means that it takes a non-material, intelligent being that's bigger and more powerful than the matter to bring it into existence. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. Second evidence, design with creation. The longer we live, the more we observe, the more that we study, even just look at ourselves, the more we see design with precision. We see it in the universe. As far as your mind can go, millions and millions of light years. And it's hard to conceive how far that is. Light travels 186,000 miles per second. A light year is how far light will travel in a year. And when we talk about things being millions of light years away, it's hard to conceive. And we're not trying to do that today, except within that universe, there is design and precision. And so it is in our own solar system. And so it is with the earth. You can't help but see it. 8 planets orbit around the sun. It used to be 9. It's been a few years back, they disqualified Pluto. It's no longer regarded as a full-fledged planet, so we just have 8. But just take this one. We are nothing but a spaceship flying through space, orbiting around the sun. We orbit around the sun one time in 365 days, precisely. And while we're doing that, we're rotating once every 24 hours so that we have night and day with precision. And so we have years, we have days, we have hours, and it's all with precision. And that 23 degree tilt means that a part of the year we have indirect sunlight. The other part is direct sunlight. That's the difference between summer and winter. And we're now changing from the direct to the indirect, while the opposite is true in the southern hemisphere. Precision, design. But let's not leave this until we mention you, your physical body. The more that we learn, whether it's simple biology, whether it's anatomy, whether it's medical science, whatever it is that we can learn about ourselves, we see more and more precision. And we become more and more impressed with the fact that there is design in the human body. We'll say more about that in just a minute, but let me add number 3 to our basic evidence. And that is a coded message system. There is a coded message system. We're suggesting that that is one of the most powerful, conclusive evidences that God exists in and of itself. Now, what is that coded message system? Well, let's take a look briefly. Even young people are familiar with the terminology. heard about DNA. If you watch a good murder mystery, oftentimes it is solved. The perp is proven guilty. How? By DNA testing. So everybody's heard of DNA. And it comes into this sermon this morning because in every cell in the human body, there are hundreds of thousands of genes. Each gene consists of a complex combination of elements called DNA. That's what DNA is, deoxyribonucleic acid. So that's within every one of us. It's a coded message, precise with design. And the DNA contains a complicated, very complicated code for mapping out the human body. When you were conceived in your mother's womb, there was a combination of genes from your father, common with the genes from your mother. Those codes combined together so as to determine, first of all, that you would be a human being and that you would develop and form and all of your organs would be in place and that you would function just right. Precision. And so when we look at this, only an intelligent divine being could write such a language of life. There are statements of convincing nature. I have one I would like to share with you. I ran across in reading. I'm always interested in what the evolutionists are saying. And an evolutionist by the name of C.P. Haskins declared about this that the most sweeping evolutionary questions at the level of biochemical genetics, which is the technical name of this science, are still unanswered. What he's saying, we as evolutionists, we don't have answers for this. We do not know the origin of this in terms of evolution. And any questions that are raised, we cannot answer. And further, let me read another very convincing statement by this evolutionist. He continued and conceded that there were, if it were not for evolutionary bias, he himself admitted, I've got evolutionary bias. I'm biased and prejudiced for evolution. And whatever evidence you place in front of me, I'm still going to be prejudiced. I'm not only biased for evolution, I'm biased against a creator. But here's what he said. If it weren't for that evolutionary bias, this puzzle would have been interpreted as the most powerful source of evidence for special creation. In other words, he has no answers. And what he sees, if it were not for his prejudice, it's the most powerful evidence for a creator. Because no one, not even evolution, can write such a complicated language of life. Think back, and I know I can't take a lot of time with each of these, but go back to the Garden of Eden in Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3. God created Adam and Eve, and he put in Adam this code. He put in Eve this code. In Genesis chapter 4, verse 1, Adam knew Eve, she conceived, and she bore him a son that they named Cain. Cain was a human being. He developed with all the normal processes that his mother and father had because of this coded message. And verse 2, so did Abel. But now bring it down almost 7,000 years to you. How was it that you were able to be born a human being, just like Adam in the Garden of Eden, or as Eve in the Garden of Eden? because of the code that messages the intelligence and transmits the development and the function of the human body. It's just astonishing when you think about it, get into it. I encourage you to think about that more. But let's add one more to this. Last but not least, biblical testimony. We have what the Bible says. The Bible itself stands upon its own evidence as the inspired Word of God, but let's look at some biblical testimony that relates directly to what we've just talked about. In Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 4, for every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. Now this is the Bible version of the law of cause and effect. If there is a house, the Hebrew writer, someone built it. There is an effect that was brought about and could only be brought about by a cause. But his conclusion about what he wants to be understood, the builder of everything is God. In Romans chapter 1 and verse 20, another biblical testimony in our New Testaments, Paul is talking about the evidence to those who were in the Gentile nations. For the invisible things of him, since the creation of the world, are clearly seen, being perceived through the things that are made, even his everlasting power and divinity, that they may be without excuse. Now I'd like to call a couple of things to our attention, what Paul is teaching here. There are invisible things of God. God is invisible. There are things about him, of course, then that we cannot see. But Paul affirms that these invisible things, since he created the world, are clearly seen. How? Not with our physical vision, but perceived through the things that are made. What, Paul? What are you talking about? His everlasting power and his everlasting deity. The fact that he is a divine being, a living being that possesses deity, and that he is almighty in his power. And that is such clear evidence. You notice what the Apostle Paul says in the last part of the verse? It's good enough that those who stand in judgment with this, that is before the New Testament was given, while the old law and the Gentiles still existed separately, would be without excuse. No excuse. So we look at that today and we understand. And one other, in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 18, we just studied this verse last Wednesday night in our adult class, studying the nature of the church as the body of Christ. In 1 Corinthians 12, good Bible readers know that what Paul is doing is showing us the church by talking about the human body. We can understand the church by understanding ourselves. And in this verse is our point. Now God has placed the members, each one of them, in the body, just as he desired. Why are you the shape that you are? Why do you have a head, arms, hands, legs, feet? Why are there 2 eyes, nose, mouth, ears? Every member. Because that's the way God designed you. God put your eyes there. You put your ears there. In other words, Paul is affirming, as this verse speaks, to precision design of the human body. We can study that further, and I encourage you, if you have interest in that, if you've studied biology, you've already dealt with a lot of this. So those are 4 areas of basic evidence for the existence of God. They're not difficult. Young people can understand them. There's much, much more that those who desire can study deeper. And they're not obscure. They're right out and open before us. We would suggest that these and other points that could be considered are evidence for a prima facie case. And that just simply means these areas of evidence are sufficient to establish beyond a doubt that God exists. There is a God. It is evidence that he is the cause as the creator. It is evidence that he is the designer of the design and the precision. It is evident that he wrote the DNA message. It could never, never, never occur by chance. And further, it is evidence that he is the provider of everything. Not only the Bible, but everything that the Bible addresses. From Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. To the end of the book of Revelation, God is the giver of every good and perfect gift, and everything in the Bible affirms the testimony of God's existence. We're going to switch gears here a little bit, talk about the other options. What is the, well, we've already identified it. But let's talk about it a minute. That option is God does not exist. There is no God. And there are some in the world today, just like they were in the first century, and Paul refers to that in terms of history, who refuse to have God in their knowledge. I do not have him in my knowledge. I do not believe in him. I don't want to believe in him. There are those who accept this proposition. God does not exist. Okay? Let's follow through with that in an honest manner. Let's be honest. And ask the question, okay, if that's what you believe, what must you believe to accept that proposition? I think that's a very worthy question. Because each of these propositions requires belief, faith, evidence. And we've already shown the evidence for God's existence. Now let's ask, okay, you believe that God does not exist? Then what do you believe? What is your evidence that that's true? Well, let's look at some things. That an individual who refuses to have God in their knowledge, who refuses to believe in God, believes. They must believe no originating cause. Everything came from nothing. There was no originating cause. And we can read statements as to how silly, how ridiculous, how impossible that is. But you must believe that if you believe there is no God, because matter did not originate itself. Something did not come from nothing. But if you believe there is no God, then you believe that it did. Spontaneous generation of life. And then we get into that. Where did life come from? Well, it just generated itself. This goes back to the very beginning. Millions and millions and perhaps billions of years ago. I saw a date the other day that dated the earth to be, I forget how many billion years old. It takes, in order for an evolutionist to rationalize such ridiculous reasoning, time. Well, time will take care of it. No, time doesn't. But where did life come from? It just kind of generated itself. All those elements came together in that primordial soup. And some oxygen, nitrogen came together. And lo and behold, there was a life in one cell. And even evolutionists, I have quotes from some who say that can't even happen today in the most sophisticated laboratory, let alone a primitive primordial condition where you've got ooze-goozy soup. it can happen. Life, but you must believe that it did. If you believe there is no God, then you must believe that life generated itself. Life came from dead stuff. Dead stuff spontaneously generated living stuff. That's what you must believe. But yet, there is no answer, even in the evolutionist mind, and there is no answer in the most sophisticated laboratory today. Design by happenstance? What about the design in everything? I enjoy looking through telescopes, like looking at the evidence that's millions of miles away. I like looking through microscopes. I think that's how I became interested in science things, because at a very young age I had a microscope. Looking through that microscope, I began to see evidences very early in my life. Design. With precision. But if we believe there is no God, then the design is still there. But you have to believe it just happened accidentally. All of the design just occurred by happenstance. Let me give you an example. And this is from an evolutionist himself. His name is Edwin Conklin. He is a professor at Princeton University. And he taught the probability of this happening by teaching this example. He said the probability of life originating accidentally would be equal to, now listen, equal to what? Well, he just likened it as an everyday thing that anybody, to an unabridged dictionary. Now, you know what that is? An unabridged dictionary? It's one of those big ones. It hasn't been condensed. It's unabridged. It has everything in it. And it's one of those big ones. Would be equal to an unabridged dictionary resulting from an explosion of a print shop. See, we had a print shop, had lots of books, and an explosion blew it to smithereens. And we go in there and we find, out of all of that, we find an unabridged dictionary produced by that explosion. What do you think the chances of that happening? Really, really. What are the chances of that happening? 1 million years? Not enough time. 2 million? Not enough time. In other words, it will never happen. There's no way that anyone in their rational mind could even begin to think that would happen. But that has better chances than life being generated spontaneously on its own. In other words, impossible. Literally impossible. What about then, lastly, you have to accept Darwinian evolution. We all hear about evolution. I know young people are sometimes confronted with the theory of evolution. I can remember our boys early, even in the 7th grade, came home one day and talked about the teacher had taught evolution in 7th grade science class. So you have to deal with that many years ago. But the point is, you have to believe that's so if you believe that God does not exist. How could one cell come into existence and then evolve into a multicell living creature, and that living creature become a water animal, and that water animal evolved into a land animal, and that land animal evolving into all the different species? It's just mind-boggling as to how it ever thought that that is possible. Crossing species. Oh, there's some change within species. Species have changed within the species boundaries, but there's no change across the lines of species. They're still not today. There's no evidence of that ever having occurred. But, I've never heard the answer to this. If we even believe that man evolved, that we actually descended from the ape, we became the highest level of life. Well, remember, there are two types of human beings here. We have males, we have females. They're not the same. And so if a male evolved, and through millions and millions of years, and we also have to agree that by the same chance, by the same probability, the female evolved. See how difficult it becomes? It becomes more and more difficult and clearly impossible. So I've got to get into what I want to say. The only other option is accepted with a belief or a faith that really is not honest. Even this evolutionist said, I would believe it except for my bias. Well, that's not being honest. It's not formed with rational thinking. That's not rational thinking. That's not using your mind for intelligent, rational thinking as you do everything else. You have to think things, believe things that are just totally out of rationality. And it's not based upon credible evidence. There is no evidence. The evolutionists are among the first to tell us. We believe in what we teach, but we have no answers for all the questions, especially the hard ones, the ones that talk about originating cause, and we really have no evidence, and especially when it comes back to explain to us how that spontaneous generation of life occurred. Explain how we can't. We have no answers for that. And so there's no rational thinking. There's no intelligent answers. There's no credible evidence. And so we're back to where we started. Can I really believe there is a God? Well, when you look at the two propositions, and you realize that both of them require faith, which one has faith that is undeniable, that is credible? And that, of course, is the one that teaches us that there is a God. Yes, and you can do so with honesty, with rational thinking, with evidence sufficient to establish the case. If we went to court and presented our case before a jury, and that jury was honest and open-minded, it would be open and shut. There is no denial of the evidence. It is prima facie. And we need to remember that expression, how solid, how full of integrity evidence for the existence of God is. But we come over, we have to have faith to believe also that God does not exist. Well, what do I believe in, you see? And make a comparison and use your thinking. And so we want to help folks understand and have faith in God. Yes, our answer again, because the fact is that God does exist. He does. I want to leave that positive thought with you. He is not a figment of anyone's imagination. He is not a fairy tale image. He is a real, living being who possesses divine nature. He's just as real. He is. We may not be able to see him, but we believe, we relate to him. But I want you to read the following with me. Read with me what will follow. He is your creator. You are accountable to him. He revealed the Bible for you. He sent his son Jesus to die for you. He wants you to spend eternity with him in heaven. He does exist, and all those things are true, honestly. As we prepare to sing our invitation song, I realize this is a big subject. Much, much more could be said about many of these things, but hopefully we've condensed it and presented it in such a way that it has helped all of us, wherever we are in our faith. We need to believe strongly and confidently, with integrity, that God does exist. If you're not a Christian, a follower of His Son, He wants you to become a Christian. He wants you to obey the gospel. He wants you to accept that cross, that death, and shed that blood for the remission of your sins. We are willing to help you with that today if it is your desire to be baptized for the remission of your sins. Or if you're already a Christian and say, hey, I've been falling short. I need to be making correction for a life that's been committing sin. Let us know while together we stand and sing.